All right, everyone, settle in. Tonight, we're taking a journey thousands of years back in time to the sun-scorched banks of the Nile. We're heading to a civilization famous for its pyramids, its pharaohs, and its pantheon of gods who were believed to watch your every single move. But let me tell you, behind those iconic gold masks and grand temples, there was a much, much harsher reality. Tonight, we're digging into the question, what would actually happen if you had to live for just one day in ancient Egypt? Because the sun isn't the only thing out there that will roast you alive. So, before we dive in, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive into history, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always fascinated to see our global community. Okay, you ready? Let's dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan to get that soft ambient hum going in the background. It's time to ease into our journey together. Welcome to ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids, gods, and what can only be described as relentless, ultraviolet violence. Before your eyes even flutter open, the sun is already waging war, blasting through the walls of your reed hut like it's auditioning for the lead role of unforgiving sky god. There are no blackout curtains here, no blinds, and you can absolutely forget about air conditioning. All you have is the raw, untamed heat of the desert, and it's already baking everything in sight, including you, before you've even thought about breakfast. You're not in a cozy bed. You're lying on a scratchy straw mat, covered by a single linen sheet that's more of a suggestion than actual protection, and that gentle Nile breeze you've seen in all the travel documentaries. Yeah, that's a myth. It probably checked out and died sometime around 2800 BC. By the time you manage to stumble outside, the temperature is already flirting with 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 32 Celsius. And listen, it's not even mid-morning yet. The sun doesn't just shine in ancient Egypt, it attacks. Your simple linen tunic, it's basically useless. It feels like you're wearing tissue paper inside a sauna. And don't even think about asking for sunscreen. There's no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even one of those floppy hats with a logo from a beach resort. Now, to be fair, ancient Egyptians did have some protective oils. But unless you were incredibly wealthy or a priest working in a temple, you weren't getting your hands on any. For you, the common person, your best bet is to smear yourself with either mud or, and I'm not making this up, crocodile dung. Apparently, it might keep you from spontaneously combusting into a human torch. And the emphasis there is heavily on might. By midday, the stones under your bare feet are hot enough to cook lentils on. Shade is the ultimate luxury. Trees are incredibly rare. You might find a sliver of relief hiding behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall is sweating by now. You, on the other hand, look and feel like someone shoved you into a clay oven and completely forgot to set the timer. And you better not complain. Ra, the mighty sun god, is watching. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was divine authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So, if you're literally melting, you should take it as a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving even one morning in ancient Egypt requires serious hydration, a whole lot of humility, and an ironclad tolerance for feeling like a roast chicken. And this is just the beginning. So you've finally dragged yourself off that scratchy straw mat. The good news is, the Nile River is just a short walk away. The bad news? You can smell it long before you can see it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the revered sacred life-giver of ancient Egypt. The entire reason a civilization could even exist here. But let's be brutally honest for a second. It also smells like a fish market had a very messy breakup with a swamp. The banks are a chaotic buzz of flies, frogs, and other things that probably shouldn't have legs, but definitely do. And this is where you take your morning bath. Soap hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had been, you wouldn't be able to afford it. Instead, you get to lather up with the most cutting-edge cleansing technology of the era. Sand. That's right. Exfoliation. The ancient Egyptian way. You just rub yourself down with a handful of coarse grains and call it skincare. It's like nature's sandpaper, only way less effective. Washing your clothes. That also happens right here in the Nile. And by washing, I mean you're pounding them against rocks while simultaneously praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake your laundry pile for a tasty midday snack. And hey, just to make things a little more exciting, let's not forget about the occasional stream of sewage runoff from a village just upstream. Remember, this one river is shared by people, livestock, and the occasional funeral boat. It's a multi-purpose waterway, and yet, somehow, this is considered clean. You scrub, you rinse, and you emerge from the water feeling slightly less sticky, but now you're moderately more worried about leeches. If you're a city dweller in a place like Memphis or Thebes, you might get lucky and have access to a public basin or a cistern. But for pretty much everyone else, it's the Nile or nothing, and don't you dare expect any privacy. This is a public bathing spot, and it's shared by families, your neighbors, their livestock, and the odd ibis that's pecking around your ankles like it pays rent. You fill your water jars, balance them on your head, and begin the trek back to your mud brick house, before the midday heat turns the very clay of the path into toast. It's a daily ritual, it's spiritual. It's absolutely necessary, and it's also just a little bit traumatic. So yes, the Nile is sacred. It feeds you, it cleans you, and it quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's some sparkling oasis. In reality, it's 1 part miracle, 1 part biohazard, and it's all you've got. By now, you've bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile, you've sandpapered yourself semi-clean, and your entire body feels like a baked fig. It must be time for breakfast, the most important and by far the least glamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day. Let's just set our expectations right here. There are no eggs Benedict. There are no vibrant fruit bowls. And there are absolutely no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a culinary event and more of a tactical refueling operation. You'll sit on a low stool if you're lucky enough to own one, or you'll just squat in the corner of your hut like everyone else. The centerpiece of your meal? Bread. And lots of it. But this isn't the bread you know. It's dense, it's coarse, and it's often as chewy as a leather sandal. It's made from emmer wheat or barley, and it's baked in these communal clay ovens that may or may not be cohabitated by the local rat population. And don't be surprised when you find a little sand in your slice. It's not a topping, it's just an uninvited guest from the grinding stones. A daily dose of extra minerals, you could say. To wash it down, you've got beer. But hold on, don't get excited. This isn't a crisp, bubbly craft ale. This is a thick, cloudy, lukewarm liquid bread. It's more of a porridge than a pint. It's packed with calories and is only vaguely fermented. Think of it as a medieval smoothie with the faint aftertaste of sour cereal and pure survival. Even the children drink it, not because they're trying to be edgy, but because it's genuinely safer than the water. The brewing process at least boils out most of the parasites, unlike the Nile, which, as we've established, is basically a petri dish with a current. If you're lucky, and I mean very lucky, you might get an onion or a few dried dates to go along with your carbon foam combo. Protein? Only if someone managed to catch a fish and didn't immediately eat it raw right on the riverbank. And as you're chewing your rock-like loaf and sipping your grain sludge, flies are buzzing around you like it's a 5-star buffet. Because for them, it is. You're swatting at them with one hand, holding your cup with the other, and trying not to think too hard about the fact that this is probably the best meal you're going to have all day. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about flavor. It's about function. It gives you just enough fuel to survive, until the next time someone hands you another sand-infused brick of bread. Bon appétit. All right, you've choked down your gritty bread, you've sipped your chunky lukewarm beer, and you've had just enough rest to maybe call yourself functional. Now it's time to get to work. And trust me on this, ancient Egyptian labor makes modern-day burnout look like a relaxing spa retreat. Unless you belong to the tiny fraction of society that includes scribes, priests, or royalty, which, let's be honest, you don't. Your job is pure, unfiltered muscle and dust. There is no air-conditioned cubicle. There are no scheduled coffee breaks. There are no ergonomic chairs. There is only sweat, sand, and the constant, nagging risk that you might just collapse from exhaustion before noon. If you're a farmer, you are ankle-deep in thick Nile mud by sunrise. Your day is spent yanking at stubborn weeds or planting barley, all under the watchful eye of an overseer whose main hobby seems to be yelling. You're using primitive wooden plows, crude sickles that look like they could break at any moment, and your own bare hands. If your back hurts, congratulations, that just means it's working. If you're a laborer, things somehow get even more biblical. Picture this. You are hauling multi-ton stones for the construction of a grand temple, all under a blazing sun, while completely barefoot. You're moving up ramps made of gravel and, what feels like, prayer. There's no OSHA here. If you trip and break an ankle, the most you'll get from the foreman is a shrug before he tells the person next to you to drag you out of the way. Working on the tombs, that's a whole other level of grind. You are hammering away at limestone, chiseling out elaborate burial chambers for people who are going to get to rest for eternity, far longer than you ever will. And if you make a mistake and mess up a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say your future job security might involve being sealed inside a chamber with a freshly inscribed curse for company. And if you're a woman, don't think for a second you're off the hook. Domestic work is just as physically demanding. You're grinding grain for hours, hauling heavy jars of water from the river, weaving linen, caring for multiple children, and you're still expected to help out in the fields when needed. Your break is the 7 minutes the baby naps while you're trying to prepare dinner. You eat on the go. You wipe the sweat from your brow with the sleeve of your tunic. You just keep moving, because slowing down means falling behind. And falling behind means another family gets your portion of the grain quota, and you get all of the blame. There is no clocking out at 5 p.m. The sun is your supervisor. When it finally, mercifully sinks below the horizon, you crawl your way home, half alive, caked in a layer of dust, and dreaming of softer sandals and a slightly less aggressive sun god. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just hard, it's endless. It is a full-body, full-time commitment to survival, day after day, until your body finally gives out or your overseer decides you're no longer worth feeding. After sweating your actual soul out in the fields or the quarry, you might be tempted to grumble a little bit. Maybe something small, under your breath, like, "This job stinks," or "Why am I the one doing this again?" Stop. Right. There. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's potentially an act of treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler, he is a literal god on earth. The pharaoh isn't some guy who got elected, or some lucky dude born into the right family. No, he is the human embodiment of the god Horus, son of the sun god Ra, personally chosen by the heavens to rule over all of Egypt and to maintain Ma'at, the sacred principle of cosmic order and divine balance. In other words, if the river floods just right this year and the harvest is good, you thank the pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, maybe you just didn't pray hard enough. Questioning his authority isn't just rude, it is blasphemy. Speaking ill of him could land you a very unpleasant date with a whip, a set of shackles, or a one-way, non-stop trip to the underworld. And you won't be taking any of your favorite burial goods with you. You see his face everywhere, on massive statues, on temple walls, on coins, even on the molds used to bake bread. His name is chanted in daily rituals. His image is painted larger and more magnificent than anyone else's in every single mural. And that's not just artistic exaggeration, that's the law, and don't ever expect to see him in person. If you're a commoner, the absolute closest you'll ever get is watching his golden boat float by during a religious festival. And if you blink, he's gone. He's back to a palace you will never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization, which, fun fact, he basically does. If you are lucky enough to work on one of his royal projects, Let's say a tomb, a temple, or a statue the size of a mountain. You are expected to serve with divine joy. At least that's the official state line. And you'll say it too, because pretending you're honored to carve stone for 14 hours a day is a whole lot safer than the alternative. And don't even begin to think about rebellion. Pharaohs crush uprisings faster than you can say dynasty. Just ask the last village that tried to withhold its taxes. Oh wait, you can't. It no longer exists. So yes, the Pharaoh is divine. And you're just lucky to be allowed to sweat in his name. Now get back to work. If you thought just surviving under the sun was hard, just wait until you fully grasp the reality that, in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, your co-worker, your food seasoning, and your mortal enemy. It is absolutely, inescapably, everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your food. There is no escape. You could be working, praying, sleeping, or just minding your own business at the market, and suddenly, a gust of hot wind will sweep by and turn your face into a grainy exfoliation experiment you never asked for. Let's start with your clothes. You're wearing linen. It's light, it's breathable, and it's about as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding back soup. The fine grains slide down your tunic, they cling to your sweaty skin, and they somehow find their way into places on your body you didn't even know had creases. Trying to eat. Good luck. Every single loaf of bread is basically a sand trap. Since the flour was ground between two massive stone slabs, little bits of grit and stone were constantly flaking off and mixing into the dough. Ancient Egyptians didn't just eat their wheat, they ate their millstones too. It's the primary reason why ancient dental remains are so often worn completely flat, like smooth river rocks. Imagine chewing your breakfast while simultaneously filing down your own molars every single day. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home is full of gaps, crevices, and windows that have no glass. They are perfect portals for wind-blown sand to pour through. Your floors are covered in it. Your cooking pots have a layer of it at the bottom. Your bed is basically a small sandpit that's disguised as furniture. Shoes are optional, at best. Most Egyptians walked barefoot, which means you are always one wrong step away from turning the soles of your feet into battered leather sandals. If you do own footwear, it's usually just a basic pair of sandals made from reeds. They might be fashionable, perhaps, but protective, not in the slightest. And then there are the sandstorms, Egypt's version of a sudden violent slap from the gods. They are swirling, blinding, and they come out of nowhere. One moment you're having a conversation with a friend, and the next, you're spitting dust and feeling like someone just dumped an entire beach directly into your eye sockets. Visibility drops to zero, and everyone around you becomes a vaguely coughing silhouette in the gloom. In short, sand is the roommate who never pays rent and never leaves. It's the unwanted spice in every single meal, and it is the silent, sworn enemy of your eyes, your lungs, and your dignity. It's not just the backdrop of your life here, it's a part of your body now. And no, you can't just wash it off. You already tried that in the Nile, which is probably full of even more sand anyway. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't just an activity you do on the weekend. It is the all-encompassing operating system for absolutely everything. Your job, your diet, your hygiene routine, your bedtime rituals. Every single aspect of your existence is dictated by gods who seem to have very specific and often very demanding opinions. First, you have to understand this. The gods are everywhere. Your small town probably has temples dedicated to a dozen different deities, and each one is responsible for some vital function of the universe. You've got Ra, who pilots the sun across the sky every day like it's some kind of divine Uber. There's Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, who's in charge of scribes and making sure the moon calendars are accurate. You have Sobek, who is part crocodile, part nightmare fuel, and is tasked with guarding the Nile. And then there's Bastet, the cat goddess, who basically runs public relations for the entire pantheon. Forget the idea of personal freedom. Your daily routine revolves around keeping all of them happy. You wake up, you thank Ra for not crashing the sun. You spill a little bit of your beer on the ground as an offering. You apologize to the goddess Hathor. You stub your toe on a stool and you curse, but you do it very, very quietly, because you don't want to risk attracting a mischievous spirit that holds a grudge. Before you eat, you offer a small piece of your food to the household gods. Before you go to sleep, you pray that Set, the god of chaos, doesn't decide to toss your entire house into a state of existential disarray overnight. Even funerals are these massive, multi-day affairs where the deceased has to pass a series of divine tests, avoid hungry demons, and prove they were a morally decent person, or else they risk being erased from existence forever. Speaking of which, ancient Egyptians took the afterlife more seriously than anything else. You don't just die and move on. No, you have to pass a terrifying judgment process that involves your heart being weighed on a scale against a single feather. The feather of Ma'at, representing truth and cosmic order. If your heart is heavier than the feather because you lied, or were cruel, or maybe you stole your neighbor's goat, then you get eaten. Eaten by Amit, a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of your absolute worst nightmare. So yes, even in death, you are still on probation. But here's the twist. To the Egyptians, this incredibly complex belief system wasn't depressing. It was comforting. They believed that all of life was part of a delicate cosmic balance, and if you followed the rituals, if you lived your life upholding Ma'at, then you had a real shot at a peaceful eternity, complete with all the food, family, and boats you could ever want. Of course, it probably didn't hurt that the richer you were, the more the gods seemed to notice you. The temples were massive, the priests were incredibly powerful, and the peasants? Well, they just hoped the gods were feeling generous that day. Because in ancient Egypt, faith isn't optional. It's your job description, it's your insurance plan, and it's your travel itinerary for the next life. So let's say you've stepped on something sharp, or you got bit by something weird, or you've caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically just called Tuesday. It's time to go seek some medical care. Just don't expect a sterile waiting room with magazines. You're about to be healed with a combination of spells, herbs, and a whole lot of sheer optimism. First, you'll be taken to a doctor. And to be fair, Egyptian healers were some of the most advanced in the entire ancient world. They had specialized surgical tools, they had written medical texts, and they had a pretty decent understanding of anatomy. But here's the catch. Science in ancient Egypt always came with a very heavy dose of magic. You get a wound. You're given a poultice made of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. Now, honey actually is antibacterial, and that bread mold has early penicillin-like properties, so it kind of works. But before the healer even applies it, they're going to chant a protective spell over you, just to be safe. Because you never know if your stomach cramps are the result of something you ate, or a spiteful ghost that's decided to take up residence in your intestines. Have a headache? You might get a dose of crushed onions rubbed vigorously into your scalp, while someone recites a hymn to the god Thoth. A chest infection. Let's smear some cow dung mixed with dates on your chest and see what happens. An eye infection. Time for a paste made of lizard's blood, ochre and beer, plus a special prayer to Horus. Surgery did happen sometimes. Abscesses were drained, broken bones were set, and deep wounds were stitched up using linen thread. But there is no anesthesia. There is just a very sharp knife and a good friend to hold your shoulders down while you scream into a mud brick pillow. Dentistry. Not great. Remember all that sand in the bread? Your teeth are worn down to nubs by your 20s. If one of them gets infected, your options are basically 1. Live with the agonizing pain, 2. Die from the infection, or 3. Have it pulled out with something that resembles a pair of pliers made by a blacksmith who had very low standards. And let's not forget the amulets. Whether you're giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing a little too loudly, a good doctor priest is probably going to hang a magical charm around your neck. You know, just in case the real issue is an invisible serpent spirit that's curled itself around your spleen. So, yes, Egyptian medicine had its brilliant moments, but for the most part, you'd better have a strong belief in the gods, because your bandage is literally a prayer. Now here's a plot twist that most people don't expect. Ancient Egyptian women actually had more legal rights than many women in later, so-called more advanced civilizations. They could own property, they could run their own businesses, they could file for divorce, and they could even take a man to court and win. Sounds pretty progressive, right? But before you pack your bags for a time-traveling girl boss vacation, just hold on. Because while their legal status might impress you, the day-to-day reality was not so glamorous. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you are likely waking up before sunrise. You're grinding grain by hand, using a giant, heavy, flat stone that chews through both the wheat and your spine. Then, it's off to haul water from the Nile, cook breakfast for the family, care for the children, manage the entire household, feed the animals, and if needed, go help your husband in the fields. You are a one-woman workforce, dressed in linen. There is no me time, there are no spa days, and there is definitely no maternity leave. Childbirth is incredibly risky and excruciatingly painful. Midwives were helpful, sure, but there were no epidurals, no disinfectant, and no push playlists featuring relaxing heart music. You give birth squatting in a hot room, surrounded by incense, prayers, and, hopefully, not too much bleeding. Let's talk fashion. Your linen dresses are light and breathable, but there's no underwear and you likely have no shoes. The sun scorches your skin, the sand grinds its way into everything, and the bugs seem to think you're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Want to wear makeup? Great. Egyptian women famously wore cosmetics, but the kohl for their eyes is lead-based, and it's applied with little sticks that look suspiciously like toothpicks. Now, if you were lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things were definitely better. You might learn to read and write, you could manage your family's estate accounts, or you could even become a powerful priestess. If you were born royal, you could even become pharaoh, like the legendary Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who ruled with absolute brilliance and terrifyingly perfect eyeliner. But if you're poor, your legal status might be high, but your reality is physical. You work, you sweat, you bend, you carry, you birth, you bury, and you pray. You're not chained by the law, but you are chained by the demands of survival. Still, it's crucial to remember that Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak for themselves in court, they could keep their own inheritance, and they didn't automatically become their husband's property when they married. Compared to many other ancient societies, that's huge. So yes, an Egyptian woman had rights, but comfort? That was something reserved for statues and goddesses, not for the woman who was elbow-deep in dough while simultaneously swatting flies off a crying toddler. You've made it. You survived another grueling day in ancient Egypt. You ate your gritty bread. You hauled your heavy water buckets. You managed to avoid divine wrath. And maybe you even dodged a sandstorm. Time to relax, right? Wrong. Because in ancient Egypt, your real test only begins after you die. Death isn't the end. It's just the start of an incredibly bureaucratic, multi-phased, high-stakes journey through the underworld. And if you thought the labor overseer in the quarry was strict, just wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul is escorted to the great hall of Ma'at. Here, standing before a tribunal of 42 different deities, you have to proclaim your innocence in what is basically the oldest legal deposition in history. You have to recite a series of negative confessions, saying things like, I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey, all while desperately hoping that the gods on the jury are buying your story. Then comes the main event, the heart test. Literally. Your heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of your soul and intellect, is placed on one side of a giant golden scale. On the other side is the single, delicate feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic balance. If your heart is lighter than the feather, or balances perfectly, you've lived a good life. But if your heart is heavier, well, that means it's weighed down by lies, cruelty, and all your wicked deeds. And that's when they bring in Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, and all terrifying. She doesn't arrest you. She doesn't fine you. She eats your soul, completely and utterly destroying it for all time. No afterlife, no second chances, just eternal non-existence. In a culture that was completely obsessed with eternity, this was the ultimate punishment. And it gets even better. You can doom yourself not just by your actions, but by your words. One wrong confession, one forgotten line during your judgment, and boom, spiritual obliteration. It's like taking an open book final exam where failing the test means you get devoured by a mythological death hybrid. If you do manage to pass, congratulations. You get to enter the field of reeds, a peaceful, idealized version of Egypt where your soul gets to live forever. There are boats to sail, crops that grow without effort, family to spend time with, and presumably, far fewer sand fleas. But the stakes are absolutely enormous. That's why Egyptians were so obsessed with tomb preparations, elaborate funeral rites, and magical texts like the Book of the Dead, which was essentially a spiritual cheat sheet full of prayers, spells, and helpful tips like don't insult the crocodile god. So yes, the afterlife might be beautiful, but you only get there if you lived your life very, very carefully. One curse word, one unpaid temple tax, and your next and final stop is becoming lunch for Amit. Sleep tight. If there is one small, solitary mercy to be found in your life in ancient Egypt, it is this: linen. Blessed, breathable linen. Your entire wardrobe, and everyone else's, is made from this incredible plant-based fabric. It's light, it's relatively cool, and it lets your skin breathe in that scorching, oppressive heat. That's the good news. The bad news? That's pretty much where the comfort ends. Whether you're a farmer, a builder, a priest, or a market vendor, you're wearing pretty much the same outfit every single day. For men, it's a short white kilt or a simple loincloth. For women, it's a straight sleeveless linen dress, sometimes held up by straps, and sometimes not. If you're from the upper class, your linen might have fancy pleats, or be adorned with beads or elegant patterns. If you're not, it's just plain white, or maybe slightly greyish, depending on how long it's been since laundry day. And we've already discussed laundry day. Most people go barefoot all the time. Sandals, which were usually made from woven reeds or a bit of leather, were reserved for special occasions or for the temple priests. So, unless you're royalty, you can expect to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and the occasional sharp rock in your heel. Accessories? Absolutely. But they were mostly functional. You'd wear amulets for magical protection, necklaces to show your social status, and of course eye makeup. That dark coal eyeliner, made from powdered coal, wasn't just for fashion. It was practical. It helped reduce the blinding glare from the sun, and was also believed to ward off eye infections. Yes, in ancient Egypt, even your eyeliner had a job to do. But no matter how well you dress, the bugs simply do not care. The flies, the gnats, the mosquitoes, they all treat your airy, breathable outfit as a personal invitation to a feast. You walk through the day swatting at them constantly, rubbing yourself with perfumed oils if you can get them, and praying that your linen tunic doesn't stick to your sweaty body like a wet curtain the moment the sun reaches its full, violent strength. And of course, your outfit doesn't change with the seasons, because Egypt doesn't really have seasons. It just has hot and slightly less hot. So your simple linen ensemble is basically your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 degrees or a chilly 70-degree evening. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what the Romans would be wearing centuries later. But don't let the breezy outfits fool you, because no matter how floaty your tunic feels, your life is still heavy with labor, heat, sand, and bugs that refuse to respect your personal space. You have survived another blistering Egyptian day. You've hauled bricks, you've dodged sandstorms, and you've prayed your linen doesn't completely disintegrate in the middle of a task. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary. Because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past the age of 35. Let's break that down. If you even make it past childhood, which is already a massive achievement, considering the infant mortality rates were sky high, you are thrust straight into adulthood by the age of 13. Marriage, work, and child rearing all start incredibly early, because honestly, you're running out of time. You might die from heat stroke, or an infected cut, or childbirth, or a crocodile attack, or a scorpion sting, or bad bread, and forget about antibiotics. If you get a fever, your best treatment is a bit of honey, some herbs, and a lot of hoping that the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the Egyptian twist. They weren't scared of death. They planned for it. In fact, they planned for it better than most people today plan for retirement. If you're rich, you commission a magnificent tomb, which is basically the ancient version of a 5-star, all-inclusive eternity suite. You start saving up your grave goods. Jewelry, food offerings, perfumes, statues, and even tiny servant dolls called shabtis, whose job it is to do all your chores for you in the afterlife. Think of them as spiritual interns who work while you get to nap forever. Your body is embalmed, wrapped in endless strips of linen, stuffed with natron salt to dry it out, and tucked neatly away into a beautifully painted sarcophagus. You're buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is less about doom and gloom and more like a mystical travel guide, complete with all the passwords for the afterlife, spells to confuse demons, and detailed instructions for not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you're poor, well, your tomb is likely just a shallow pit dug into the desert sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever fabric your family can spare. Maybe a pot or two with some food is placed nearby, and then you're covered with earth. There are no murals, no golden mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians held on to that dream of the afterlife, a peaceful, fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where you could farm without sweating, eat without being hungry, and sail the Nile forever under a gentle, forgiving sun. So yes, you'll probably die young in ancient Egypt. But if you lived well, prayed right, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods along the way, you just might get to spend eternity in style. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least, you made it into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly. Because in ancient Egypt, even the dead get robbed. Let's start with a simple truth. Tombs were full of expensive stuff. Gold amulets, precious jewelry, perfumed oils, intricately carved statues, chests full of fine linens, and for the pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure. All of it was intended to be taken into the afterlife. But putting that much treasure in a sealed tomb is basically like putting up a giant flashing sign for anyone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbery was so common that it became a full-time, society-wide problem. Pharaohs tried to fight it by hiding their tombs deep inside cliffs, locking them behind secret trapdoors, and scrawling terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire." Spoiler alert, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came anyway. They came at night, in secret, often with inside knowledge. Sometimes they were locals. Sometimes they were corrupt workers who had actually helped build the very tombs they were now plundering. In some cases, even the priests and the guards were in on the scam. The punishment for getting caught was severe, think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or a slow death. But considering how valuable the tomb goods were, especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back. But it wasn't just the wealthy who got robbed. Even the graves of commoners were disturbed. A poorer Egyptian might have been buried with just a small pot of beer or a single loaf of bread for their journey into the afterlife. But even that was still worth stealing. Food was scarce. Simple tools were valuable. And linen was practically a form of currency. The irony here is that tomb robbing wasn't always just about greed. Sometimes it was about survival. Egypt went through periods of famine, political collapse and invasions. A hungry worker might break into a tomb not for treasure, but for food. And when your own children are starving, a few funeral offerings start to look less like sacred objects and more like dinner. So, in ancient Egypt, you're not even safe just because you're dead. Your tomb can be looted, your name can be erased from the walls, and your mummy can be unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and very poor moral judgment. Rest in peace, only if no one knows where you're buried. We've all seen them. Those majestic, mysterious, and beautiful carvings that cover the walls of Egyptian temples and tombs. The birds, the eyes, the snakes, the lotus flowers, the men walking sideways like they're on a high-fashion runway. These are ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. They are visually stunning, and they are insanely difficult to learn. Sure, they look cool, but just try reading them. Hieroglyphs weren't just some decorative art form. They were a full-blown writing system with over 700 characters, and that number kept growing. Some of the symbols represent entire words. Others are just sounds. And many of them are what are called determinatives, which are symbols you add at the end of a word just to clarify its meaning. Because, writing the word star with an actual drawing of a star next to it might be a little too straightforward. And don't expect any spaces between words or any punctuation. Ancient Egyptian writing was basically one long, continuous, beautiful riddle that had a ton of artistic flair, 0 vowels, and a deep, deep need for context. Oh, and it can be written left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending on whatever the scribe felt like doing that day. The trick is to look at which way the birds or the people in the carvings are facing. That's the direction you're supposed to read in. If they're facing to the right, you read from the right. If they're facing left, you read from the left. And if they're somehow upside down, well, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs wasn't for commoners. Literacy in ancient Egypt was incredibly rare. Maybe only 1% of the entire population could actually read and write. If you wanted in on that exclusive club, you had to become a scribe, which meant committing to years of intense, grueling education, usually starting as a child. You'd have to memorize hundreds and hundreds of symbols, copy endless scrolls of text, and practice so much that your hand would probably curl into a permanent claw by the time you were 15. But the payoff? It was huge. Scribes were respected, they were well fed, and they were never, ever made to haul bricks under the blazing sun. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, personal letters, and sacred religious texts. They were absolutely essential to the functioning of the entire society and were protected from almost all forms of manual labor. In a world where writing was power, the scribes ruled quietly from the shadows. For the rest of the population, though, writing was something magical, literally. Hieroglyphs were believed to hold sacred power. To write someone's name on a tomb wall was to preserve their soul for all eternity. To erase it, that was total spiritual annihilation. So, yeah, spelling really mattered. So, while hieroglyphs might look like a beautiful gallery of ancient emoji, they're much more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube that's been wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Are they beautiful? Yes. Easy to learn? Absolutely not. After all of this, the heat, the hunger, the sand, the superstition, and the backbreaking labor, it's time to ask the big question. Would you, a modern person, actually survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest with ourselves. Probably not. Sure, it's easy to romanticize the ancient world. We think of the golden tombs, the lotus-scented air, the graceful hieroglyphs, the gods with animal heads, and this incredible civilization with a deep appreciation for order and beauty. But behind those iconic monuments and that stunning art was a world of brutal realities that spared almost no one except for the absolute elite. Your average day as an ancient Egyptian started on a dirt floor, surrounded by a cloud of flies, with the full knowledge that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on blazing hot sand. You hauled your own water, you cooked over open fires, and you lived shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You constantly worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a venomous snake might slither onto your sleeping mat in the middle of the night. You had no toothpaste, no real medicine, no retirement plan. And if you were lucky, you maybe had 2 changes of linen clothes. You served a god king who could take your land away with a single decree, a climate that would cook your skin by noon, and a religion that required you to pass a literal divine test after you died just to get into the good version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget all the things you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, and no easy escape. Once you were born into your social class, that was pretty much it. There were no promotions, no career changes, no finding yourself. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a labourer, a mother, a servant, or you were dead. And yet for all of this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, in their purpose, and in the beauty of life itself. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They told jokes, they painted. They imagined an eternity, with enough clarity and conviction to build stone monuments that still stand today, thousands of years later. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone, you would likely fold before the second sandstorm hit. So, no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay, because they lasted for thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, there is one pyramid that refuses to be forgotten. Its surface isn't adorned with peaceful symbols of faith or gentle, smiling gods. Instead, it's covered with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents. Dozens of them. They jut out from the temple's facade as if they were frozen in mid-strike, their fangs bared, their eyes wide. This is the temple of the feathered serpent, known to many as the temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that reverently reach for the sky, this one feels different. It feels predatory. From the moment you approach it, there is an eerie, unsettling sense that you are being watched. The stone serpent heads aren't just mere decoration. They were warnings. They were symbols of divine wrath. And hidden just beneath their gaze, something horrific once unfolded. Excavations over the past few decades have revealed something that archaeologists never expected to find. Hidden deep beneath the temple's base were not just the usual ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing. Human remains. And not just a handful. Over 200 bodies, many of them decapitated, their hands bound tightly behind their backs. They were young men, warriors perhaps, buried in large groups, their bodies arranged with a chilling mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives still at their sides. Others wore necklaces made from human teeth or jewelry that had been crafted from human jawbones. They weren't simply thrown into the ground. They were deliberately placed in positions of deep symbolic significance. It's clear this was no ordinary mass grave. This was a message. It was a divine transaction that was carved into stone and sealed with blood. But what kind of belief system could possibly justify such horror? Who or what demanded that so many lives be taken all at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a religious building. It was a theatre of power, a place where the city's rulers fused cosmology, warfare and fear into a tool to maintain absolute control over a city of more than 100,000 souls. And this ritual bloodletting may have been the terrible price they believed they had to pay to keep the entire cosmos in balance. As you stand before this temple today, gazing at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture. You are looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood and that they had every right to deliver it. But who were these people? Who commanded such violence and then vanished, seemingly without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Before the mighty Aztec Empire rose to power, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone, there stood a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas. Teotihuacan. Its name, which was given by the later Aztecs who found it in ruins, means the place where the gods were born. And when you walk its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that seem to scrape the heavens, you start to understand why. At its height, around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling, sophisticated metropolis of over 100,000 people. That made it one of the largest cities in the entire world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and the great cities of China in both size and influence. It was a city that was meticulously planned, with wide boulevards, gridded streets, and large apartment compounds that housed entire extended families in multi-story structures made from volcanic stone. And at the center of it all stood three massive, enigmatic pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan so different and so mysterious. No one knows who built it. Seriously. To this day, we don't know the name of the people who constructed this incredible place. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no kings' names carved into stone monuments. Teotihuacan seems to have been a society ruled not by a single, all-powerful monarch, but perhaps by a council of elites, a powerful theocracy, or something altogether foreign to our modern understanding of ancient power. And despite this complete anonymity, their influence was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been found hundreds of miles away, from the great Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the distant Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. We find their obsidian blades, their unique ceramic styles, their murals, and even evidence of their political meddling. In one famous case, emissaries from Teotihuacan may have helped to overthrow a local Maya king just to install a new ruler who would be more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast and powerful network? How did a city with no known writing system command so much authority all across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined their cosmic ideology with raw statecraft. Their temples were more than just places of worship. They were tools of control. They were aligned perfectly with astronomical events. They served as grand theaters for ritual sacrifice, and they reminded every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in perfect sync. And at the heart of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To truly understand the temple, you first have to understand the powerful, enigmatic deity it was dedicated to, the Feathered Serpent. You might know him by his later Aztec name, Quetzalcoatl, or as Kukulkan to the Maya. This figure is one of the most complex and important gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But here in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs even rose to power, the Feathered Serpent was already a central, and possibly supreme, divine force. But here's the paradox that lies at the heart of this god. What kind of deity is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that for a second. Serpents slither on the ground and through the underworld. They shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. They are creatures of the earth. Birds, on the other hand, soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and the life-giving wind. They are creatures of the heavens. To combine these two opposing forces, the earthbound and the sky-dwelling, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something entirely cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The Feathered Serpent wasn't just another god on the list. He was a bridge between the different worlds. On the facade of the temple, carved in deep, dramatic relief, we see dozens and dozens of his images. He has these huge, goggle-like eyes, bared teeth, and elaborate plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these carvings represent the god himself. Others suggest they're actually depictions of elite warriors or priests who are dressed in his divine regalia to signal their own power and authority. Either way, they are everywhere. The temple is absolutely covered in these snake-bird hybrids, almost as if the very structure itself is breathing with a divine and menacing presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens and abstract concepts. He was intimately tied to the act of sacrifice. In the Mesoamerican worldview, blood was the sacred fuel that kept the entire cosmos in motion. And this god, though he would later be remembered by the Aztecs as a more gentle, civilizing deity, seems to have had a much darker role here in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some of the creation myths, the feathered serpent descends into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead in order to create a new race of humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods had sacrificed themselves for humanity at the beginning of time, and so humans, in return, were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine, meticulously designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every single stone, every serpent head, and every buried victim was a cog in that great, bloody machine. The people of Teotihuacan didn't just worship the feathered serpent, they embodied his very logic, a logic of paradox, power, and blood. And the most disturbing truths of that logic were hidden just beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure that was half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends about it. Scholars made educated guesses, but no one could have possibly imagined what was buried deep beneath its layered stones, until archaeologists finally broke through in the late 1980s and again in the early 2000s. And what they found wasn't just unexpected, it was deeply unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations, they discovered a series of long-sealed chambers and deep pits, each one filled with carefully arranged human remains. And these weren't the messy, chaotic results of a war or a plague. These were deliberate sacrifices. They were systematic, they were ritualistic, and they were chillingly cold. The victims, numbering over 200 in total, were mostly young men, many of them between the ages of 15 and 25. Some of them wore grotesque necklaces made from human jawbones. Others had their hands tied tightly behind their backs. A few had been decapitated. And scattered nearby were the tools of the trade. Obsidian knives, still sharp and as black as night, the unmistakable instruments of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets even darker. The arrangement of the bodies wasn't random at all. It followed precise geometric and symbolic patterns. The bodies were placed in quadrants, aligned with the cardinal directions, possibly to create a living mirror of the cosmos. Even the number of bodies in each pit seemed to matter. This wasn't just about death, it was about creating meaningful death. Surrounding the victims were other offerings. Jaguar bones, the skeletons of serpents, exotic shells that had been brought all the way from the distant Gulf Coast, small figurines, and more obsidian blades that had clearly never been used in battle. This wasn't a punishment. This was a gift. These young men, most likely captured warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. To the people of Teotihuacan, the very act of building a great temple may have required human sacrifice as a core component. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood. Every new layer of the pyramid could only be raised after another sacred offering had been made. The deeper you dig, the more sacrifice you find. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels that were filled with liquid mercury and glittering mica materials that were strongly associated with the underworld. The floor of this tunnel would have glimmered like a pool of water, or perhaps like the night sky. Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead? The more they excavated, the more it seemed like the temple wasn't just built on top of death, but was specifically constructed to encase it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. If you look closer at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you'll start to notice something strange, something deeply unnerving. It doesn't just sit on the landscape, it aligns with the entire universe. The city of Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire metropolis was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central Avenue of the Dead runs at a 15.5-degree angle off of true north. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate architectural shift, possibly designed to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster, or maybe with the position of the sun on specific, important ritual dates. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits directly along this avenue, locking it into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have been debating this for decades. Some suggest the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others argue that it connects to the movements of Venus, the planet most sacred to nearly all Mesoamerican civilizations. Venus was often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set at a certain time, wars were declared, offerings were made, and temples were activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of certain numbers, like the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies in the sky, appears in its stepped platforms. There is a clear symmetry, a rhythm, and a stunningly advanced understanding of both earthly math and cosmic cycles. And then there's what lies beneath the surface. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered that long, sealed tunnel running directly beneath the temple. This wasn't some crude passage. It was a deliberately constructed subterranean world. The walls were once covered in powdered pyrite, a shimmering gold-colored mineral that would have reflected torchlight like a star-filled sky. When you combine that with the pools of liquid mercury and the mica-lined walls, the tunnel seems to have been designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would have been like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to the moment of creation and rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a kind of cosmic machine? A portal that was designed to align the earth, the sky, and the spirit realm. Some scholars believe the people of Teotihuacan saw time as circular, not linear. And so, every ritual, every building, and every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle, death leading to renewal, and sacrifice fueling rebirth. The temple's precise alignments may have helped them predict celestial movements, coordinate their harvests, and, more importantly, know the exact right time to offer blood to the gods. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just looking at the stars. It was trying to speak to them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just having a conversation with the stars. It was a political weapon, and its primary target was the human mind. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, and to remind every single viewer, whether they were a local citizen or a foreign dignitary, exactly who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. I want you to imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You're a visitor, maybe a trader from a smaller, less powerful city-state. You would arrive at the great Avenue of the Dead, already completely awestruck by the sheer unbelievable scale of Teotihuacan. But then, when you reached the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would freeze. The dozens of serpent heads stare down at you, their fangs bared in a permanent snarl. Jaguar symbols growl from the stone. The massive plaza in front of you once held huge public gatherings, not just for celebration, but for ritual. And you might even be forced to witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan understood something absolutely crucial. Fear is a form of power, and nothing stirs fear quite like the wrath of the gods. By orchestrating these ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and powerful death imagery, they sent a crystal-clear message to everyone watching. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos. This was theatre. The city's priests, dressed in elaborate feathered headdresses and wearing obsidian masks, would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning their cosmic myths into a terrifying political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods anymore. It was about reminding the audience that the city's rulers had a direct line to the divine, They, and they alone, could open the heavens or summon the rain. They could protect the people, or they could destroy their enemies. Even the architecture of the temple was designed to reinforce this propaganda. From the temple's upper tiers, the leaders could look down upon the sprawling plaza. They controlled not just the narrative of the ritual, but the very physical space in which it all unfolded. The people looked up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and they knew their place in the hierarchy. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry back home with them tales of both awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, and the blood rituals that lit the sky red at dusk. In a world where people believed that gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece. And the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the absolute heartbeat of Mesoamerica. It was a city of fire and stone, of gods and of blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed, something broke. And the silence that followed was as chilling and as absolute as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan wasn't loud and glorious. It was gradual, and then it was sudden. Signs of strain had started appearing decades earlier, signs that the great cosmic engine was beginning to falter. Archaeological evidence points to a long period of drought, which would have led to crop failure and widespread social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this grand city, its centralized power, its religious dominance, its carefully maintained cosmic order, all began to crack under the pressure. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered widespread burn layers across the city's elite compounds, its temples, and its administrative buildings. This includes clear signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent itself. But what's strange is that the lower-class residential areas, where the common people lived, were mostly untouched. This wasn't an external invasion. This was an uprising. It was a rebellion, most likely from within. The very people who had once watched the sacrifices in awe may have finally risen up against their priest-kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which was once the ultimate symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Its beautiful sculptures were defaced. Fires were set. Its sacred ritual spaces were desecrated. And then, silence. Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned overnight, but it had lost its soul. Its vast trade networks collapsed. Its unique artistic production ceased. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite simply disappeared from the historical record. The temple no longer spoke, and yet the mystery only deepened, because while the city itself faded away, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its magnificent ruins. They were awestruck. They believed that only gods could have built such a place, and so they named it Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't a ruin. It was a relic of a divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on a foundation of cosmic order and blood, vanished without leaving behind a single written word, without a final record of its history, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried beneath layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. Locals avoided it, farmers tilled the soil around it, and the world mostly forgot about it, until the modern age of archaeology arrived and began to crack open the secrets that were buried within its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began the monumental task of excavating Teotihuacan. What they found was astonishing. A perfectly engineered city, far older and in some ways more mysterious than that of the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and the 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and most chilling revelations. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011, when researchers, using ground-penetrating radar, uncovered that sealed tunnel hidden deep beneath the temple of the feathered serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1,800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from ever entering it again. After years of careful excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld. It was lined with pyrite to mimic a starlit sky. It had pools of liquid mercury, and it contained thousands of untouched ritual objects: jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even perfectly preserved carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message left in a bottle. Why would the ancient builders go to such incredible lengths? What were they trying to preserve, or perhaps hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in secret initiation rituals for new rulers. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world itself, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, and where the divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once thought to be only toxic, may have represented water, or the fluid veil that separates the world of the living from the world of the spirits. And among all these glittering, mysterious fragments, there was one persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still lingered, not just as a myth, but as a presence in the murals, in the carvings, and in the very geometry of the temple itself. The serpent hadn't disappeared. It had simply coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each new excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, one that was carved not in language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all of our advanced tools, one truth remains. The temple still keeps its secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization that is long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, the cosmos, and death into one single, unbreakable system. Tourists snap photos. Children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, it's psychological, spiritual, and cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of the sky and the earth, continued to evolve. He would be adopted by the later Toltecs and then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone. He became the bringer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who vowed he would one day return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows us that myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist in art, in murals, in literature, and in the national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coins, on stamps, and even on government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy here, one that's less visible and far more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks us hard questions. How far will human beings go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't just a historical site. It's a mirror. It's a reflection of us, our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty, and our capacity to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness often comes with shadows, that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while burying their deepest secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning, not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down, we know the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind. to remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we ever spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, maybe even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that can only be described as sound with intention. It wasn't speech. It wasn't melody. It was pure, primal rhythm. A hand slapping against a piece of hollow bark, a stick tapping a resonant stone, a foot stomping the earth in perfect time. And somewhere, in that ancient hypnotic repetition, something magical emerged. The very first drum beat. It wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything at all. But it felt like something. It felt like communication. It felt like movement. It felt like emotion was finally taking a physical form. Anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments that date back over 30,000 years. These were likely made from whatever natural materials were on hand: hollowed out tree trunks, dried gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing that was meant to be preserved. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or some idle distraction. They served very real, very important purposes. They were used to warn, to summon, and to connect. Imagine a small tribe scattered across a dense forest. A single sharp beat from a distant drum, and everyone would know danger is coming. Or a celebration has begun. Or perhaps the gods are listening. The earliest drums weren't just tools. They were extensions of the human body. They were a heartbeat, externalized a pulse that could be felt and understood across an entire valley. Drumming wasn't something you just watched or listened to. It was something you participated in, together, around crackling fires, under the vastness of the stars, in deep caves, where the echoes made the very air itself seem to vibrate with life. These ancient rhythms became a language of raw emotion. Joy, grief, warning, hope. All of it could be expressed, not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Long before the first flutes were ever carved from bone, before stringed instruments were even dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to our rituals, and uniting scattered individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's very first instrument, and perhaps its first form of a collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not just instruments, they were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, and every corner of the ancient world developed its own unique rhythms, but the purpose behind them was nearly universal: to commune with the unseen world. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest and most complex drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with every aspect of existence, life, death, and ancestry. The djembe, for example, which is traditionally carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to contain 3 distinct spirits: the spirit of the tree it was carved from, the spirit of the animal whose skin gave it its voice, and the spirit of the craftsman who brought it to life. When played in circles, the djembe didn't just accompany the rituals, it was the ritual. Then there were the legendary talking drums, which were capable of mimicking the pitch and tone of human speech. In West Africa, these incredible instruments were used to carry complex messages across miles of dense terrain, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the invention of the telephone, humans were already drumming their messages through the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity. To them, it was the heartbeat of Mother Earth herself, and it was played in sacred ceremonies to honor the ancestors, to summon healing energy, or to guide the souls of the recently deceased on their journey. The large powwow drum, which is played by a circle of drummers all striking it in unison, was both a musical and a spiritual engine. It was a communal pulse that was meant to align human beings with nature and the spirit world. In Australia, the Aboriginal people used clapsticks and percussive stomps during the sacred dream time, a mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans would strike their frame drums to enter deep trance states, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during the long, dark polar winters. These weren't performances. These were acts of survival, of healing, of storytelling, and of connection. To drum was to remember. To drum was to belong. And it was always communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing their hearts and their intentions. There was no sheet music. There was no stage, just bodies moving, hands striking, and souls stirring, all unified by a single, powerful rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening. Something that words alone could never hope to express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken a language of power, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved from small tribes into vast kingdoms and empires, the drum transformed. It became a tool of domination, an instrument of order, and a weapon of fear. The earliest armies didn't have radios or megaphones to communicate. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called gu were struck to coordinate troops across vast and chaotic terrains. With a single, resonant boom, commanders could signal a charge, a retreat, or a complex flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each distinct rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen and react, even through the terrifying din of battle. In ancient Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce the decrees of rulers and to summon the public for ceremonies. But in times of conflict, those same drums would echo through the city walls, terrifying their enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a type of frame drum that was used in processions and by certain religious cults, like that of the goddess Cybele. And while it wasn't a battlefield instrument in the same way their horns and standards were, it still carried a powerful symbolic weight. It was the sound of empire, of discipline, and of unshakable order. But perhaps no army in history wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their metabands, which were the world's first known military orchestras, would unleash an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before a battle began. The relentless deafening pounding of the kos, which were giant kettle drums, and the davul, which were double-headed bass drums, struck absolute terror into the hearts of their enemies' forces. Some European accounts from the time describe soldiers literally freezing in panic before they had even seen a single Ottoman soldier, completely paralyzed by the sheer volume and intensity of the sound. Drums were also used to enforce power off the battlefield. In royal courts all across Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles would announce the arrivals of nobility. They would mark coronations, and they would underscore important political rituals. To beat a drum in this context was to make a clear declaration: power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as powerful tools of resistance. On plantations, where their instruments were often banned, they used rhythmic communication to keep their culture alive, and, in some cases, to help orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even when faced with unimaginable oppression, refused to be silenced. So whether it was signaling divine right, military discipline, or raw, visceral fear, the drum has always carried a powerful message. This is who rules. This is who marches. And this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations branched out across the continents, so too did their rhythms. They evolved in their form, their purpose, and their philosophy. In the East, drums became incredible tools of precision, spirituality, and high ceremony. In the West, they leaned more into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two very different paths, but one shared heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument capable of speaking a divine language. The tabla, with its crisp, delicate tones and its fluid, graceful rhythm was used in both classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than just an accompaniment. It was a conversation. Each individual stroke had its own name, its own meaning, its own syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't just percussive, it was a form of spoken poetry that required decades of training to master. The tabla player was not just a musician, he was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant. It was played in Shinto rituals, in traditional theatre, and in war. Playing the taiko required not just technical skill, but incredible physical discipline. The drummers moved with a kind of martial precision, their stances grounded and powerful like warriors. During festivals, the booming sound of the taiko would echo through the mountain valleys, and it was believed to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum would lead the hypnotic flowing music of the gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and other musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, interlocked, and almost celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world in Europe, drums had a very different story. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, used for signaling soldiers, marking time, and enforcing discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and the Baroque eras that drums slowly began to enter the world of formal music, and even then, they were usually kept in the background, their timpani thundering beneath a royal fanfare or echoing in the cavernous space of a grand cathedral. In this divergence, you can see two very different philosophies. The East saw rhythm as both an art and a spirit, something that was tied to breath, to chant, and to meditation. The West, for a long time, saw it as structure and force, a tool to rally, to march, and to measure. But both worlds understood the drum's core power, the power to shape time, to dictate the pace, to elevate a ritual, and to connect human beings in ways that could ever transcend language. Whether it was Eastern or Western, sacred or strategic, the drum always remained central, always listening and always speaking. From mountaintop temples to steamy jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always found a home in the space where the human meets the divine. Long before the rise of organized religion as we know it, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, and to transcend the ordinary world. In many African spiritual traditions, drums weren't just seen as instruments, they were considered spiritual beings in their own right. In Yoruba traditions, for example, the sacred batar drums were used to communicate directly with the orishas, the gods and ancestral spirits. The master drummers who played them weren't just performers, they were priests. The complex rhythms they played were a form of encoded prayer, specifically designed to invite the gods to descend from the heavens and dance among the living. Each pattern had a unique purpose, and each beat pointed in a sacred direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of the gods themselves. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, dances the eternal dance of creation and destruction while holding a small, hourglass-shaped drum in one of his hands. This drum, called the damaru, is said to represent the very pulse of the universe itself. Its beat symbolizes the primordial sound from which all of creation emerged. From silence to sound, from the void to form, the drum is the divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its slow, soft, and deliberate strikes are meant to guide the breath and focus the awareness, acting as a kind of metronome for the soul. It's not meant to be loud or aggressive. It simply reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the singular focus of the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The beat is constant, it's steady, and it's meant to mimic the rhythm of the womb or the heartbeat, helping participants to enter deep trance states or to connect with powerful ancestral spirits. In these sacred spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany the prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued or viewed with suspicion for centuries, the drum eventually found a sacred role. In gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches, drums became a means of praise and a conduit of power. They are the driving heartbeat behind voices that are lifted in raw, heartfelt devotion, a powerful reminder of struggle, of hope, and of the divine rhythm that exists in every single life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the God being invoked, the drum has always been there. Not as mere decoration, but as a vessel for energy, for intention, and for all the mysteries that we cannot speak. Because when words fail us in our worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were largely solitary instruments, one body, one sound, one purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In noisy factories, on crowded streets, and in vaudeville music halls, percussion was being completely reimagined. And by the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage, played by different people. They were united, forming something entirely new and powerful, the drum kit. It was born out of pure necessity. In the late 1800s, military bands and theatre orchestras required several percussionists to play all the different parts: the bass drum, the snare, the cymbals, the woodblocks. Each part was handled by a different person, but performance spaces were tight and budgets were even tighter. So, inventive drummers began to experiment, combining different instruments into a single playable setup. The true breakthrough came in 1909, when the first commercially successful bass drum pedal was patented. Suddenly, a single drummer could strike a massive drum with one foot, freeing up their hands to do much more. The idea caught fire. Over the next few decades, drummers began adding more and more to their rigs: hi-hats, tom-toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, creating a single setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all played from one seat. What emerged was more than just a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In the smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit absolutely exploded into life. Early jazz drummers didn't just keep time. They played the kit like it was a voice, using syncopation, swing, and incredible sensitivity. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich eventually turned the drum set into a blistering lead instrument. Rhythm finally became storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock and roll, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, and more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw drum kits expand, with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals becoming common. Drummers like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, Neil Peart of Rush, and Keith Moon of The Who pushed the absolute limits of human stamina and creativity. The drummer wasn't in the background anymore. He or she was the engine of the band. Today, the drum kit is a global staple. You can find it in gospel churches, on massive EDM stages, in punk rock garages, and on sold-out world tours. And even as digital kits and drum machines continue to rise in popularity, the raw physicality of a live, acoustic drum kit, the crack of the sticks, the resonance of the skins, the sweat of the performance remains irreplaceable. It is a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries of innovation, where tradition meets technology, and where one single drummer can speak with the power of 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of different dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, and from culture to culture, the drum has taken on countless forms, each one carrying a distinct identity, a unique sound, and a specific purpose. These aren't just different types of instruments, they are cultural signatures, crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the djembe remains the vibrant heartbeat of community gatherings. It speaks in sharp, high-pitched slaps and deep, resonant bass tones, and it's designed for dynamic storytelling and spontaneous musical conversation. Next to it, the double-headed dundun provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which everyone else can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music, It's a living conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the community. In the Middle East, the doumbeka, goblet-shaped drum, often made from clay or metal, delivers crisp, fast-paced, and intricate rhythms that are absolutely essential to both belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding incredible precision from its player and inspiring movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one that was born from resilience and cultural fusion. The conga, the bongo, and the timbales all reflect a rich blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums are still used in Santeria rituals, with each drum speaking a divine language that is tied to a specific orisha, or deity. In Brazil, the thunderous sound of the surdo and the strange, squeaking voice of the cuica drive the massive samba parades through the streets, infusing pure joy into protest, prayer, and carnival. In India, the mridangam and the tabla dominate South and North Indian classical music, respectively. These drums are so precise that they are actually tuned to a specific pitch, completely blurring the line between rhythm and melody. Every single finger movement matters, and every stroke carries with it centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum. It's one of the oldest and most widespread drums in all of human history, and it appears in everything from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, from the tools of Siberian shamans to modern folk ensembles. Whether it's played with the fingertips, with mallets, or with brushes, it's proof that even the simplest designs can be profoundly sacred. What unites all of them? Purpose. Whether they are used for guiding a dance, for healing, for ritual, or for revolution, each of these drums reflects the soul of its people. Their very rhythms carry the sound of their geography, their history, and their identity. The global family of drums isn't just diverse, it's universal. Because no matter where you go in the world, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a close, the sound of drums began to change, not so much in rhythm, but in texture. The physical began to give way to the programmable. The sweaty palms, the wooden sticks, and the calloused fingertips all started to share space with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drums had officially arrived. It all began in the 1970s with primitive, early drum machines devices like the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78 that used analog circuits to simulate very basic beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even a bit awkward. But musicians saw something else in them: perfect consistency, absolute control, and endless possibility. Then, in 1980, a revolution happened. Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic that its deep, booming kick drum and its crisp, snappy snare would go on to define entire genres of music. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were all born, in part, from the 808's synthetic pulse. It was no longer about trying to mimic acoustic drums. It was about creating entirely new sounds. As digital audio technology progressed, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits, like the Roland V drums, allowed drummers to play with a natural feel while triggering thousands of different sampled or synthesized tones. Artists could now rehearse silently with headphones, record complex drum tracks without a single microphone, and switch between dozens of different drum kits with just the press of a button. And with the rise of personal computers came digital audio workstations, or DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now, anyone with a laptop could build incredibly complex rhythms, layering kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into vast sonic architectures. Finger drumming on MIDI pads became an art form in its own right. Some purists feared that this digital shift meant the death of traditional drumming, a replacement of human feel with cold, sterile precision. But that's not what happened. Instead, a hybridity emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating electronic triggers and sample pads into their kits. Producers started layering the warmth of human-played drums with the punch of machine beats. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't erase the past, they just reimagined it. And today, we live in a world where a single person sitting in their bedroom can build rhythms that would have once required entire orchestras, where ancient grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life on neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move bodies, to shape time, and to make the silence speak. Across every era, every empire, and every evolution in technology, one thing has never changed. The drum remains our oldest and most enduring voice. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has never been just about music. It's about connection to ourselves, to each other, and to something bigger than us. It is the heartbeat we all share. Not metaphorically, literally, because even before we're born, nestled safely in the womb, the very first rhythm we ever hear is that of our mother's heart. It's steady, it's safe, it's alive, and when we enter the world, we spend our lives chasing that rhythm forever. The drum has been our constant companion through joy and through war, through worship and through protest. It has marched beside kings, and it has risen with rebels. It has echoed through ancient temples and modern subway tunnels. It speaks in every language because it is a language one that bypasses our rational thought and speaks directly to the body, to the bones, and to the blood. In moments of grief, we drum to mourn. In moments of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we drum just to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve. You can find handpan street musicians weaving ethereal, new age rhythms on city corners. You can find indigenous communities preserving their ancient drumming traditions against all odds. You can find stadium drummers rallying massive crowds in perfect unison. You can find children banging on pots and pans with a pure, instinctual joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning how to create rhythm. But no algorithm can ever replicate the human soul that exists behind a single, imperfect beat. Because rhythm is not just counted, it's felt. And maybe that's why the drum has outlived empires and trends. Because deep down, we all crave that anchor in time, that shared pulse that tells us that we are here, together, right now. No matter how advanced our instruments become, or how virtual our experiences grow, there will always be something profoundly grounding about skin on skin, stick on hide, or hand on wood. A beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a relic of the past. It is a constant reminder that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, and to play. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent. Before Manhattan became a towering forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows. But these shadows weren't cast by 80-story towers. They were cast by church steeples and low, sloping rooftops. In the early 1800s, the iconic Skyline we know today simply didn't exist. The city clung to the southern tip of the island, a dense, chaotic sprawl of brick townhouses, timber-framed shops, and roads that were little more than packed dirt. Buildings rarely climbed beyond 5 or 6 stories. And that wasn't because ambition was lacking, but because gravity had the final say. The taller a building got, the more weight it had to carry. And when you're building with stone and brick, that height comes at a very steep price. The walls had to be made incredibly thick at the bottom just to support the upper levels, which left a lot less usable room inside and required enormous, expensive foundations. To build high was to build heavy, and building heavy just didn't make financial sense. So, the city grew horizontally instead, spreading northward along the famous grid that had been planned in 1811, one of the boldest and most ambitious urban blueprints of its time. But underneath that grid, buried beneath the layers of cobblestone and soil, Manhattan held a secret weapon, its bedrock, deep, dense, and unshakable. The granite spine that runs beneath the island would one day support some of the tallest and heaviest structures in all of human history. But for now, it just lay there, quiet, untouched, waiting. Life in early Manhattan was noisy, but it was grounded. Commerce bustled in the harbor. Tall-masted ships lined the piers, and horses clattered through the narrow, crowded streets. The economy grew, immigration surged, and the island swelled with a raw, new energy. But still, the city hugged the ground. The sky remained open and largely untouched. The only real vertical statements being made were the churches, with Trinity Church being the most prominent. Its spire, which was completed in 1846, rose over 280 feet, and for a time, it was the tallest structure in all of New York. But even that was more of a single, elegant symbol than a true skyline. What no one knew then was that the skyline's future wouldn't be shaped by stone or wood. It would be shaped by iron, by steel, and by pure, unbridled vision. And it wouldn't be limited by the ground. It would rise far, far above it. Manhattan wasn't yet a city of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready, the dream was forming, and soon the skyline would begin to stretch. For centuries, gravity was the greatest architect in Manhattan. It kept buildings short, it kept cities flat, and it kept human ambition firmly tethered to the earth. But in the mid-19th century, two revolutionary breakthroughs would break the skyline wide open. One of them lifted people, and the other one lifted the buildings themselves. The first breakthrough came in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis unveiled his revolutionary safety elevator. In a dramatic demonstration at the New York Crystal Palace, Otis stood on a platform that was suspended high above a packed crowd. He then ordered the single rope holding it up to be cut. The crowd gasped in horror, but the platform didn't plummet to the ground. A hidden safety mechanism kicked in, locking the lift securely in place. With that single breathtaking moment, Elisha Otis completely changed the rules of height. Up until then, the top floors of buildings were always the cheapest. No one wanted to climb 5 or 6 flights of stairs. But once elevators became safe and practical, those upper floors suddenly became premium real estate, offering incredible light, fresh air, and high status. The vertical city suddenly made perfect economic sense. But being able to move people upward wasn't enough. Buildings themselves still had to rely on those thick, load-bearing walls, which just grew more and more cumbersome the higher they went. That's where innovation number 2 arrived, the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 90s, pioneering engineers began using internal frames made of steel to support the entire weight of a building. This allowed the exterior walls to become thin, light curtains rather than heavy structural anchors. This method, known as steel frame construction, gave architects a newfound freedom. They could now build as high as the frame could possibly handle. Suddenly, height was no longer a liability. It was a strategy. The technology had arrived. The materials were here. And Manhattan, with its solid bedrock foundation and its booming economy, was the perfect canvas. The island's tight geography already encouraged vertical thinking, and its growing status as the financial capital of the world meant that everyone, from banks to powerful newspaper publishers, wanted their name to be visible in the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable, and together they didn't just change architecture. They redefined what a city could be. Now the race would begin. Not outward, but upward. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer content to just sprawl. It wanted to soar. The ground was full, the streets were packed, and the only place left to build was up. With the steel frame and the safety elevator now established, Manhattan became a proving ground for new technology, and its skyline became a battlefield for human ambition. The first shots in this war for the sky were fired in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, which was home to Joseph Pulitzer's massive newspaper empire, rose 20 stories above an area known as Park Row. It became the tallest office building in the world, briefly. Not to be outdone, the nearby Park Row building claimed the title for itself in 1899, standing at an impressive 391 feet. Each new tower that went up was a declaration, not just of wealth, but of vision. To build higher than your competitors was to announce to the world, we are the future. Soon, the Skyline began to sprout with these new steel giants. The Singer Building, which was completed in 1908, stood at a striking 612 feet, becoming the tallest building in the world and the very first structure to surpass the height of the spire of Trinity Church, which had held that record for over 50 years. But even that incredible height wouldn't last for long. In 1913, the magnificent Woolworth Building took the crown. It was designed by the architect Cass Gilbert and was funded entirely in cash by the retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth. It rose an astonishing 792 feet, covering over 55 stories in a soaring, beautiful display of neo-Gothic architecture. It was dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce, and the Woolworth Building wasn't just tall, it was majestic. It was an architectural sermon about America's incredible rise as a modern global power. But this wasn't just an architectural competition, it was branding warfare. Corporations and powerful institutions vied to build the tallest, most distinctive buildings towers that would etch their names permanently into the sky. Every new record for height was a headline, and every new silhouette was a powerful symbol. The skyscraper had become the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, and completely impossible to ignore. And beneath all of this progress, the rhythm of construction beat relentlessly. Steam shovels dug massive foundations down into the solid granite. Riveters hammered hot steel together day and night. And immigrant ironworkers balanced precariously on beams hundreds of feet in the air, with no safety harnesses, only pure grit and an ironclad resolve. The Skyline was no longer a theoretical dream. It was real, and it was rising. As the Roaring Twenties swept through Manhattan, the Skyline began to dance, not just climb. This was the era of Art Deco, a time when architecture wasn't just about achieving new heights, but about achieving it with incredible style. The Jazz Age poured its own unique elegance into steel and stone, and New York's buildings became shining icons of movement, light, and pure energy. The most dazzling of them all was the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it stood at 1,046 feet tall, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world. It was commissioned by the car magnate Walter Chrysler, and the tower wasn't just a monument to his corporate success, it was a symphony of design. Its iconic stainless steel spire, which was built in secret and then hoisted into place in a single night to surprise its competitors, shimmered in the sun like a celestial crown. Ornamental eagles, which were modeled after the hood ornaments on Chrysler automobiles, jutted out from the corners like metallic guardians of the future. With its beautiful curves, its chevrons, and its machine-age detailing, the Chrysler Building didn't just scrape the sky, it seduced it. But the race wasn't over. Just a few blocks away, another titan was rising, the Empire State Building. Completed in 1931, right in the depths of the Great Depression, it soared to an incredible 1,250 feet, stealing the title of world's tallest building from Chrysler and holding onto it for nearly 40 years. It was built in a stunningly short 410 days, with thousands of workers laboring through wind, snow, and a constant cloud of steel dust. The Empire State Building wasn't just a building, it was a message. It was a declaration that New York, and America, endures. While much of the country struggled, Manhattan continued to push upward, and its buildings mirrored the era's dual identity. They were elegant but aggressive, optimistic yet fiercely competitive. The Art Deco style perfectly captured the contradictions of the time. It was geometric but graceful, modern but also steeped in a kind of ancient myth. The towers weren't just functional, they were sculpted, and at night they would glow like beacons of pure possibility. And yet, beneath all of that glitter, there was still a clear purpose. These incredible skyscrapers were built by industrial barons and financial moguls who wanted more than just profit. They wanted a legacy. They wanted a permanent place in the skyline and in history. By the end of the 1930s, Manhattan's iconic silhouette had finally taken shape. The city was no longer just a capital of finance. It was a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't just whisper about progress, it shouted it. After World War II, Manhattan's skyline entered a completely new phase. It was a phase that was less ornamental and far more corporate. The sweeping elegance of Art Deco gave way to the clean, sharp lines of glass and steel. America was now a global superpower, and New York City was the front office of that empire. The skyline adapted accordingly, not with decorative, glittering spires, but with imposing monuments of pure efficiency. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters rose on the banks of the East River. It was a bold, boxy glass tower, flanked by low-slung marble wings. Its arrival marked a clear shift in the city's architectural tone. It was global, it was diplomatic, and it was unapologetically futuristic. The UN building wasn't just another office tower, it was an architectural statement about a new international order in the atomic age, and it set the stage for everything that would follow. Next came the Lever House in 1952 and the iconic Seagram building in 1958. Both of these are defining examples of what became known as the international style. These towers, with their sheer curtain walls of reflective glass and their visible steel frames, were minimalist by design. They were completely free of decoration, stripped of all sentiment. They didn't look like cathedrals or castles anymore. They looked like machines, precise, modern, and ruthlessly practical. The Seagram building, which was designed by the legendary architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, was especially influential. Its bronze-tinted glass, its uniform grid-like pattern, and its innovative open plaza introduced a new kind of urban presence. It wasn't trying to impress you with fancy flourishes. It was trying to project a sense of order, discipline, and immense power. This was corporate architecture at its absolute peak. Cold, beautiful, and completely authoritative. As businesses boomed in the post-war era, so did the skyline. Midtown Manhattan became the undisputed hub for America's major corporations, its banks, its media companies, and its most powerful law firms. These new skyscrapers didn't compete for beauty anymore. They competed for square footage, for prime location, and for sheer presence on the horizon. Gone were the soaring spires and the stone gargoyles of the past, and in their place stood these silent, mirrored monoliths, anonymous giants that reflected not just the clouds, but the raw ambitions of Wall Street. And yet, even in their silence and their simplicity, these towers spoke volumes. They told the story of a country that was obsessed with growth, with precision, and with modernity. They defined the corporate era, and they ended up shaping the look and feel of cities all across the globe. But even amid all this glass and steel, one thing remained true. The skyline was still a symbol. Only now it whispered power rather than shouting beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, but the city still had room to dream even bigger. That dream began to take shape at the southern tip of Manhattan, where a pair of identical towers would soon alter the skyline forever. They were bold, they were controversial, and they were unlike anything the world had ever seen before. They were the twin towers of the World Trade Center. The project was conceived as a massive hub for global commerce, and it was overseen by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The architect, Minoru Yamasaki, designed the buildings with a radical minimalist approach: pure vertical lines, sleek aluminum cladding, and no tapering setbacks. Each tower would rise over 1,360 feet, completely dwarfing every other building in the city. The ambition here wasn't just architectural, it was ideological. This was meant to be a statement of global connectivity, a new temple for capitalism. Construction began in 1966. To make room for the massive project, an entire neighborhood, a place called Radio Row, was completely razed. The foundations for the towers required a revolutionary new engineering technique known as the slurry wall, which allowed the engineers to dig deep down into the soft riverbed soil while holding back the immense pressure of the Hudson River. It was one of the most challenging and most brilliant engineering feats of its time. When they were finally completed in 1973, the Twin Towers weren't universally loved. Some critics called them sterile, or just giant, uninspired boxes. Others mourned the loss of the ornate, more detailed towers of the past. But to many people, the towers were pure presence. They were bold, they were confident, and they were commanding. They didn't dance with the sky like the Chrysler Building did. They didn't gracefully taper like the Empire State Building. They just stood firm, two identical pillars of certainty and immense scale. More than just buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol, a symbol of business, of unity, and of American might. People came from all over the world to visit the observation decks, to dine at the famous windows on the World Restaurant, or just to stand in the plaza below and stare up in absolute awe. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers completely dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline, giving it a powerful sense of symmetry and gravitas. And while other cities around the world would eventually build taller structures, none of them carried the same iconic weight as those 2 towers, rising side by side into the sky. The skyline had changed once again. This time, not with ornament or with artistry, but with monumental ambition. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed forever. Not by cranes or by construction, but by violence and smoke. In less than 2 hours, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed into a mountain of dust, fire, and twisted steel. Thousands of lives were lost, and the 2 pillars that had once defined Lower Manhattan were simply gone. The attack wasn't just an assault on people or on buildings, it was an assault on symbols, on everything that those towers had come to stand for: commerce, modernity, freedom, ambition. For decades, the Twin Towers had defined the southern end of the island. Their clean, monolithic forms had become a kind of visual shorthand for New York City itself. And now, that skyline was fractured. In the days and weeks that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound. It was open, it was smoldering, it was raw. Where there had once been incredible height and light, there was now only absence. And that absence echoed everywhere. Photographs of the skyline suddenly looked hollow. The familiar, powerful silhouette was broken, and the space that had once pulsed with global energy became known to the world as Ground Zero. For the first time in over a century, Manhattan wasn't building up, it was mourning. The city grieved, but it also endured. Steelworkers, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers from all over the country poured onto the site, not to construct, but to recover. Rubble was cleared, lives were honored. A profound silence replaced the usual clang of iron and construction. In a city that is famous for always rushing forward, this was a forced, painful pause, a long, deep breath that was held in collective pain. But even in its sorrow, New York did what it has always done. It looked up. The discussions about rebuilding were complicated. They were emotional. They were political. What should take the place of the towers? Should anything even rise there again? Could the skyline ever be restored without erasing the memory of the loss? For years, the hole in the ground remained, a constant physical reminder of what was and what had been taken. It became a sacred space. And yet, slowly, plans began to emerge. Designs were drafted, and eventually, the cranes returned, the steel returned, not to erase the tragedy, but to create something new right beside it. But before anything was built, one truth stood crystal clear. The skyline was no longer just a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette that was now shaped by both triumph and by tragedy. And the story wasn't over. In the aftermath of that devastation, a city known for its speed, its ambition, and its relentless movement paused. Not to surrender, but to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11 wasn't just a matter of architecture, it was a matter of identity. What would rise in the place where the Twin Towers once stood? Could anything? The answers came slowly. In 2003, a master plan by the architect Daniel Libeskind was selected for the new World Trade Center site. And his vision wasn't just about height, it was about healing, memory, and renewal. The plan would carefully blend new commercial space with public memorials, with parks, with transportation, and with light. It wasn't a return to what had been. It was a statement of what could be. At the heart of it all stood a new, magnificent tower, One World Trade Center. Originally called the Freedom Tower, it rises from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, and it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, standing at a symbolic 1,176 feet, a number chosen to echo the year of America's independence. But this wasn't just about patriotism, it was about defiance. It was about reaching up again, despite the immense loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center officially opened its doors. Clad in shimmering, reflective glass and standing like a giant crystal obelisk, it didn't try to imitate the past. It offered something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building seems to change with the sky, glowing, darkening, and sometimes almost disappearing, depending on the light. It is a powerful presence, but a presence without arrogance. And right beside it, the 9/11 Memorial opened in 2011. Two deep, square voids sit exactly where the original towers once stood. Each one has a continuous, beautiful waterfall, and the names of every person who was lost are etched into the bronze parapets that surround them. The memorial is not just a part of the new skyline, it has become a part of the city's very soul. The new skyline took years to fully take shape. Other towers rose around the site. 3 World Trade Center, 4 World Trade Center, and 7 World Trade Center. Each one is sleek, modern, and purposeful. And together, they represent not just a city that was rebuilt, but a city that was transformed. New York didn't just replace what was lost. It evolved. It honored its past while building for its future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something that is both deeply American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you can't keep it from rising. Today, the Manhattan skyline is more than just a collection of buildings. It is a living symbol. It's a symbol of ambition, of resilience, and of the American dream itself. No other city silhouette in the entire world carries so much historic and emotional weight. It's been etched into our pop culture, into our history, and into our collective memory. You could draw its basic shape with just 5 or 6 lines, and people all over the world would recognize it instantly. It tells a story. It's a story of bold engineers and fearless ironworkers, of visionary architects who imagined spires that could pierce the clouds, and of the millions of immigrants who crossed oceans to help build them. It speaks of risk, of reward, and of constant reinvention. The very same churn that defines New York City itself, and it has never been finished. It never will be. The skyline is alive, and it is always changing. In just the last few years, it has stretched even higher, but this time, the vertical race has moved uptown. Along a stretch of 57th Street, now known as Billionaire's Row, a new breed of super slender residential towers has risen like elegant glass needles above Midtown. Buildings like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street are incredible feats of modern engineering. They are pencil thin, they are wind tested, and they are built almost exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. Critics have called them sky-piercing expressions of inequality. Others see them as breathtaking marvels of modern ambition. Meanwhile, over on the west side, the massive Hudson Yards development has created an entirely new neighborhood out of thin air, with gleaming new glass towers, public art installations, and corporate headquarters rising where rusty old rail yards once sprawled. The skyline now stretches farther west than ever before, constantly evolving with the city's changing needs and its ever-present ambitions. But even as it grows and changes, the Skyline holds its past tightly. The Empire State Building still glows with different colors every night. The Chrysler Building's spire still gleams like a jewel at sunrise. And One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud, a silent guardian watching over Lower Manhattan. The Skyline remembers everything that came before, even as it reaches for whatever is coming next. More than any single monument or any statue, it is the Skyline that defines New York, not just in its physical form, but in its meaning. It is a place where humanity dared to build upward, again and again, through financial booms and busts, through world wars and deep wounds. It is a city of millions, all reflected in a forest of steel and glass. It doesn't just mark the place where the city ends and the sky begins. It marks the place where dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's just the next floor.